The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke from the smoldering fields of battle, where the dust of conflict still hung heavy on the horizon. It was the year 1918 BCE, and Abram, a man marked by faith and a fierce resolve, stood in the aftermath of a great victory. He had just triumphed over the kings of the East, rescuing his nephew Lot from their grasp. The echoes of clashing swords and the cries of fallen men were fading, but the weight of survival pressed upon him like the armor he had shed. As he surveyed the landscape, a figure emerged, cloaked in the authority of his office. Melchizedek, king of Salem, approached, exuding an aura of peace, an oasis amidst chaos. He was not just a ruler, but a priest of God Most High, a rare blend of spiritual and temporal power. Genesis 14:18 recounts their meeting, detailing how Melchizedek brought forth bread and wine, offering sustenance to the weary warrior. This was not mere hospitality, it was a profound blessing, a recognition of Abram's triumph not only in battle, but in fidelity to the divine. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth," Melchizedek proclaimed, his voice resonating with authority. The words hung in the air, a declaration that reached beyond the physicality of their meeting. In that moment, Abram felt a divine affirmation, a reminder that his victories were not solely of his own making. The king continued, "And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." With these words, Melchizedek acknowledged a higher power at work, weaving the divine into the fabric of human struggle. Abram, humbled, responded by giving Melchizedek a tithe of all he had recovered. This act of giving, a tenth of his spoils, symbolized more than mere gratitude. It was an acknowledgement of the king's rightful place as priest and king. In that ancient world, the practice of tithing was deeply rooted in the covenantal relationship between God and his people. The tithe was not just currency, it was a sacred bond, an act of faith, as significant as the blood that had been shed on the battlefield. It is recorded in the ancient texts that this encounter established a legacy that echoed through generations. Melchizedek's role as a priest forever is mentioned in Psalm 110:4, a testament to his enduring significance. This priesthood, separate from the Levitical line established later, marked Melchizedek as a unique figure, one who transcended the ordinary boundaries of time and tradition. His identity would later be woven into the fabric of messianic prophecy, as the author of Hebrews 7:3 would assert that Melchizedek was without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God. In that moment of communion between Abram and Melchizedek, the foundations of faith were laid. The very essence of their exchange, bread and wine, the symbols of sustenance and divine presence, would resonate through millennia, finding its way into religious observance and sacramental life. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Abram felt a shift within himself. The battle was won, but the war of life, the struggle for faith, for purpose, was far from over. He stood before Melchizedek, not just as a conqueror returning from war, but as a man seeking understanding and connection to something greater than himself. The air was still, charged with the promise of what was to come, and in that silence, a covenant was born, one that would ripple through the ages with profound implications for generations yet unborn. In the year 1918 BCE, the dusty winds of Canaan whispered tales of triumph and loss. Rumors of conflict reached the ears of Abram, who had just returned from a fierce battle against the kings of the East, a coalition led by Chedorlaomer. It was a grueling confrontation, where the clashing of swords and the cries of the wounded echoed through the valley. Abram had risked everything to rescue his nephew Lot, taking 318 men from his household, a small but fierce band that had fought valiantly against overwhelming odds. The victory was hard won, and the spoils from the defeated kings were abundant. As Abram approached the valley of Shaveh, a place of quiet peace, he was met by a figure who emerged from the shadows of the ancient oaks. This was no ordinary man. The king of Salem, Melchizedek, approached with an air of solemnity. Melchizedek was described in Genesis 14:18 as both king of Salem and priest of God Most High. His very presence commanded attention. The air around him thrummed with a power that transcended earthly authority. Clad in robes that seemed to shimmer with a light of their own, he bore bread and wine, gifts of sustenance and blessing. "Blessed be Abram, by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth," Melchizedek proclaimed, his voice deep and resonant, like thunder rolling across a distant mountain. The blessing ignited a spark in Abram's heart, a recognition of divine favor amidst the chaos of battle. In that moment, Abram understood the weight of Melchizedek's presence, a priest whose lineage was obscured, whose origin was unknown. He was a figure that seemed to step out of time itself, a symbol of a priesthood that would echo through generations. In the silence that followed, Abram offered a tithe of his spoils, a tenth of all he had gained from his victory. This was a significant act, one that demonstrated not just gratitude, but recognition of Melchizedek's divine authority. The tenth, a sacred portion, represented more than wealth. It was a covenant of faith. In that instant, Melchizedek accepted the offering, affirming Abram's standing before God. The absence of genealogy surrounding Melchizedek is striking. Unlike other biblical figures, he arrives on the scene without introduction or ancestry. This mystery invites speculation. Some scholars argue that his portrayal might symbolize a heavenly priesthood, a foreshadowing of Christ, as noted in Hebrews 7:3, where he is described as without father or mother, without genealogy. The mystery surrounding his origins only adds to his stature, establishing a connection to the divine. Archaeological findings in the Qumran caves, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, provide fascinating insights into Melchizedek's significance. The scrolls contain references to him as a heavenly figure, a priest whose role transcends earthly bounds. They speak of a righteous and eternal priesthood, a theme echoed in the writings of the New Testament. This connection weaves Melchizedek into a larger narrative, one that extends beyond the confines of his immediate story. As Abram and Melchizedek conversed, the air was thick with the scent of earth and distant fires. They shared not only food, but also a communion of spirits. "I shall remember this day," Abram said, his voice steady. "You have given me more than bread and wine. You have given me hope." There was a profound acknowledgement of shared purpose, a recognition that the divine hand guided their lives in ways they could not yet comprehend. As they feasted beneath the starlit sky, the sounds of the night enveloped them. The rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the quiet murmur of a brook. The world outside their moment held turmoil, yet here, in this sacred space, they found solace. This meeting would resonate far beyond their conversation. It was a moment that would ripple through time, echoing in the hearts of those who would come after. In the aftermath of their communion, Melchizedek blessed Abram again, proclaiming, "And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." The words hung in the air like a promise, a declaration of faith. Abram, moved by the weight of this blessing, understood that his victory was not merely the result of his strength, but of divine intervention. The king of Salem was not just a monarch. He was a priest who interceded before God, bridging the earthly and the divine. As dawn approached, casting a soft glow over the land, Melchizedek prepared to depart. He left Abram with a sense of purpose, an understanding that his journey was intertwined with the divine narrative unfolding in the world. Melchizedek's departure was as enigmatic as his arrival. Without a trace of his origins or a hint of where he would go next, he faded into the mists of early morning, leaving behind a legacy that would endure. Abram watched him go, feeling the weight of the encounter settle within him. The bread and wine remained, a reminder of the communion they had shared, a moment that transcended time and place. This encounter with Melchizedek would shape Abram's faith and influence generations to come. In the years that followed, the memory of Melchizedek would linger in the hearts of the faithful. His role as a priest and king became a source of inspiration and reflection. The psalmist would later echo this significance in Psalm 110, verse 4, declaring, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." This proclamation would resonate through the ages, intertwining the stories of kings and priests, of faith and sacrifice. Even as the world around them changed, as cities rose and fell, the legacy of Melchizedek served as a beacon of hope. His mysterious presence was a reminder of the divine connection that underpins the human experience. And as darkness settled on the land, the stories of Melchizedek would continue to inspire, illuminating paths for those who sought the light of understanding amidst the shadows. Abram stood in the valley of Shava, a place of ancient significance where kings had once gathered to negotiate and make covenants. The air was heavy with the scent of rich earth, the remnants of the recent battle still clinging to him. He had just returned victorious, having led 318 men against a coalition of kings, rescuing his nephew Lot and reclaiming the spoils taken from Sodom. Yet, even amid such triumph, Abram felt the weight of the moment, one that would not merely shape his own destiny, but echo through generations. As he gazed at the horizon, Melchizedek approached. The king of Salem, draped in priestly garments, exuded a serene authority. His presence was commanding, yet gentle, a paradox that seemed to embody the very nature of the divine. Melchizedek was not merely a ruler of a city, he was also a priest of God Most High, a title that would resonate through the ages. In the shadows of the mountains, the sun began to dip, casting long silhouettes that danced upon the valley floor, as if nature itself bore witness to this sacred encounter. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High," Melchizedek proclaimed, his voice rich and resonant, echoing in the valley. "Creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." His words were both a declaration and a benediction, a recognition of divine favor that transcended the immediate moment. This was not simply a blessing, it was an acknowledgement of the spiritual battle that lay beneath the physical victory. The Canaanite kings had not merely been defeated in battle, they were a manifestation of the larger struggle between good and evil. Abram, his heart swelling with gratitude, knelt before Melchizedek. The act was one of reverence, but it was also a recognition of the profound truth that Melchizedek represented. This king-priest was a figure of mystery, his lineage unknown, yet steeped in divine purpose. In the book of Genesis, we find no genealogy for Melchizedek, a deliberate choice that has led many to ponder his nature. Was he a historical figure, or did he symbolize a higher priesthood that would one day find fulfillment in Christ? This moment was the inception of such theological contemplation. As Melchizedek offered bread and wine, symbols of nourishment and covenant, Abram felt the weight of tradition upon him. The act of sharing these elements invoked the sacred and underscored the importance of communion between them. It was a foreshadowing of future covenants that would be sealed with similar gestures. "Take and eat," Melchizedek urged, his voice calm. "For the blessings of the Most High are upon you, and nothing shall remain lacking in your hands." The bread, warm and fresh, broke easily under Abram's fingers. The wine, rich and full, spoke of abundance. It was a moment of deep communion where earthly sustenance met divine promise. In the silence that followed, Abram reflected on the battle he had fought and the divine assistance he had received. The day had begun with uncertainty, his heart heavy with the fear of loss. Yet here in the valley, he felt the palpable presence of God's favor. He had been chosen, not merely for his lineage, but for his faithfulness and his willingness to act. "I give you 1/10 of everything," he declared, a response born of gratitude, acknowledging the source of his victory. The tithe reflected a deep understanding that all he had achieved was not solely through his might, but through the grace of the divine. This gesture, though simple, would resonate through time and become a practice of faith for generations to come. The act of tithing would echo in the very fabric of the cultures that followed, embedding itself into the spiritual practices of Judaism and later Christianity. It would become a testament to the recognition of divine providence in the lives of believers, a reminder that all abundance stems from God. Melchizedek received the tithe with a nod, his gaze piercing yet warm. "Your faith has made you whole, Abram," he intoned, the words enveloping the air like a sacred promise. "This victory is but a glimpse of what is to come, a shadow of a greater truth." The sun began to set, bathing the valley in hues of gold and crimson, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating this divine encounter. The shadows of the past, present, and future seemed to converge in this sacred moment, binding Abram to the eternal. As they stood together, the weight of their shared experience settled upon them. Abram's heart was filled with a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. He was to be a father of nations, a bearer of a promise that would unfold through the ages. The covenant made with the Most High was not only about land or lineage, it was a commitment to live in faith, trusting in the unseen. The significance of Melchizedek's blessing lingered in the air, a reminder that true kingship was rooted in servitude and worship. In the depths of night, as the stars began to punctuate the dark canvas above, Abram realized that this encounter was not merely a chance meeting, but a divine appointment. The priest-king before him was a precursor to a greater reality, one that would ultimately lead to the establishment of a new covenant, one marked by love and sacrifice. In that quiet valley, the legacy of Melchizedek began to take shape, a figure wrapped in mystery, whose life and actions would echo through the centuries. Abram felt the gravity of the moment, the gentle touch of destiny guiding him forward. With renewed strength, he prepared to return to his people, carrying with him the blessings bestowed by Melchizedek, a promise that would shape not just his life, but the lives of countless generations to come. The night deepened, yet the light of that blessing would never fade. The air was thick with the scent of earth and sweat as Abram approached Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of God Most High. The spoils of battle, gleaming and heavy, filled the leather pouches slung across his shoulders. With the defeat of the four kings who had taken Lot captive, Abram's victory was not merely a matter of might, but a divine act woven into the fabric of his existence. In Genesis 14 verse 20, it is written, "And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." This blessing was not just ritual, it marked a profound acknowledgement of Melchizedek's unique authority. Abram, weary yet resolute, knelt before Melchizedek. The priest's presence was commanding, his robes flowing and rich, reflecting the stature of a man who bridged the earthly and the divine. As Abram laid the spoils before him, he knew this act transcended mere gratitude. It was a recognition, a tithe of 10%, an offering that signified respect for the priestly order that Melchizedek represented. The amount was not insubstantial. It was a significant share, reflective of the wealth he had acquired: gold, silver, and choice livestock, remnants of the defeated king's riches. In these ancient days, tithe was not just a financial transaction, it was a spiritual one. The act of giving a portion of one's gain was a declaration of faith and loyalty. Abram's choice to offer a tenth of his spoils was a profound submission to Melchizedek's priesthood, establishing a relationship that would echo through generations. As he handed over the first of the spoils, he spoke, his voice steady yet reverent. "To you, O Melchizedek, I give a tithe of all." The weight of these words hung in the air, a solemn pact of faith. Melchizedek accepted the offerings with a nod of acknowledgement. His eyes sparkled with a divine knowledge, as if he understood the larger narrative unfolding, one that intertwined their destinies. He raised his hands, invoking a blessing over Abram. The words flowed like honey, rich with meaning, and resonated deeply within Abram's heart. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." This blessing was no ordinary benediction. It was a covenant reaffirming Abram's status as chosen, destined for greatness, as the father of nations. The significance of this moment extended beyond their immediate exchange. Melchizedek's priesthood was unique, transcending the boundaries of lineage that defined later priestly orders. He was a type of Christ, as later writers in Hebrews would elaborate, embodying the dual roles of king and priest. In Psalm 110:4, the psalmist would proclaim, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." This foreshadowing would resonate through centuries, weaving Melchizedek's legacy into the fabric of faith. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley, Abram felt the weight of history upon his shoulders. This encounter with Melchizedek was not simply a meeting of two men, but a divine orchestration. The very act of giving a tithe symbolized the acknowledgement of divine authority, setting a precedent for future generations. Abram's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and awe. He was part of a larger narrative that would shape the fate of his descendants. The echoes of their conversation lingered long after they parted. Abram would recount this moment to his children, instilling in them the importance of honoring God and recognizing his servants. This act of giving was a testament to faith, an enduring lesson that would resonate through the ages. The tithe was a reflection of Abram's trust in God's provision, a recognition that all he had was a gift from the Almighty. As the day came to a close, the stars began to prick the darkening sky, twinkling like promises in the night. Abram returned to his camp, his heart lightened by the exchange. The blessings of Melchizedek had fortified him, granting a spiritual strength that would carry him through the trials yet to come. He understood now that this tithe was but a small portion of a much larger trust placed upon him. In the years that followed, this moment would be recalled not just as a historical event, but as a divine encounter, a testament to the intertwining of earthly kingdoms and heavenly authority. The legacy of Melchizedek would be revisited by generations, a figure enshrined in the minds of those who sought understanding of divine order and priestly duty. The significance of Melchizedek's priesthood, expressed through this humble act of receiving a tithe, would ripple through the fabric of faith, marking the beginning of a recognition that would extend far beyond the borders of Salem. It was the dawn of a new understanding, where the sacred and the secular intertwined, and where the giving of a tithe became a profound expression of faith, trust, and divine connection. As Abram settled into the quiet of the night, the stars overhead seemed to shine a little brighter, illuminating the path ahead, a journey shaped by faith and divine promise. The communion shared with Melchizedek was a reminder of the sacred bond forged between heaven and earth, a bond that would guide and inspire in the days to come. In the heart of Israel, during the reign of King David around 1000 BCE, a profound realization began to echo through the halls of power and the hearts of the faithful. David, a man after God's own heart, sat upon his throne, contemplating the divine tapestry woven through generations. It was during these contemplative moments that the significance of Melchizedek surged forth in his mind, a figure who had stood in the shadows of history, yet whose impact would resonate through the ages. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Jerusalem, David took quill to parchment. With each stroke, he began to compose what would become Psalm 110, a prophetic declaration that would reverberate through the annals of time. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Psalm 110:4. This was no mere proclamation. It was an acknowledgement of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood, a priesthood that transcended the temporal and pointed to a greater fulfillment. David's understanding of Melchizedek was steeped in the law and legacy of his ancestors. The king knew that Melchizedek was not just a king of Salem, but a priest of God Most High, as recorded in Genesis 14:18-20. In that ancient encounter, the mysterious king had blessed Abram, the patriarch of the Israelites, and received a tithe of the spoils from Abram's victory over enemy kings. This act of giving was significant, establishing a precedent that would ripple through the fabric of Israelite worship and society. As David penned the psalm, he was acutely aware of the implications of his words. The priesthood of Melchizedek was distinct from the Levitical priesthood, which had been established through Moses and Aaron. The Levitical priests served in the tabernacle and later the temple, offering sacrifices and mediating between God and the people. Yet Melchizedek's priesthood was one of a higher order, unbound by lineage and time. He represented an eternal covenant, one that would find its ultimate expression in the Messiah. The significance of this realization was profound. For David, it was as if the ancient story of Melchizedek was coming alive, intertwining with the promise of a new covenant. This covenant would not be just for the Israelites, but would extend to all nations, a theme echoed throughout the prophetic writings. David sensed that Melchizedek was a type of the coming Messiah, a figure who would embody both kingly authority and priestly intercession. In the quiet of that night, David also recalled the archaeological findings that had begun to surface from the dusty ruins of ancient Canaan. The discovery of ancient texts, including those found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, hinted at a deeper understanding of Melchizedek, depicting him as a heavenly figure who would play a central role in God's redemptive plan. This was no longer just a historical figure. He was a prophetic archetype whose legacy would inform Israel's understanding of God's character and purpose. As David concluded the psalm, he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency to share this revelation with his people. The royal court, filled with advisors and warriors, had gathered that evening for a feast. As the aroma of roasted lamb filled the air, David stood, his voice steady and clear. "Let it be known," he declared, "that the Lord has exalted a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." His words hung in the air, a declaration that would challenge the very foundations of their understanding of priesthood and kingship. The nobles exchanged glances, murmuring amongst themselves. They felt the weight of David's proclamation, a divine revelation that called for reflection and action. The people of Israel, accustomed to the rituals of the temple, would now need to grapple with the implications of an eternal priesthood. It was a call to recognize the spiritual significance of their history and to anticipate the coming of a Messiah who would fulfill the prophetic promises. In the days that followed, word of David's psalm spread throughout the land. The shepherds in the fields, the farmers in the valleys, and the traders in the marketplaces began to speak of Melchizedek. They pondered the meaning of an eternal priesthood, one that was not limited by human frailty or mortality. They began to see their history, their struggles, victories, and covenants as part of a larger narrative that God was weaving through time. Among those who listened was a young priest in the temple, who would later recount the impact of David's words in his own writings. He would detail how the echoes of Psalm 110 shaped the understanding of generations to come. The priesthood of Melchizedek became a topic of theological discourse, a source of hope and expectation for the coming Messiah. As the years passed, the words of the psalm would find their way into the hearts of the faithful. They would be sung in worship, recited in prayer, and pondered in quiet reflection. The promise of a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek became a beacon of hope during times of trial and tribulation. It reminded the people of Israel that their God was not distant, but intimately involved in the unfolding story of redemption. David's declaration not only highlighted Melchizedek's significance, but also set the stage for the greater narrative of Christ, who would later be identified as the ultimate fulfillment of this prophetic word. The author of Hebrews would later draw upon this theme, affirming the eternal priesthood of Jesus, declaring, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." This connection between Melchizedek and Christ became a cornerstone of Christian theology, illuminating the continuity of God's redemptive plan throughout history. As David's quill rested on the parchment, he marveled at the divine inspiration that had flowed through him. The words of Psalm 110 were not merely ink on paper. They were a profound truth, rooted in the very fabric of God's covenant with humanity. They beckoned all who would listen to recognize the eternal significance of Melchizedek in the unfolding story of faith, a story that would transcend time and echo through eternity. In the quiet aftermath of Abram's encounter with Melchizedek, the echoes of their shared moment lingered like the scent of incense in the air. Melchizedek, the king of Salem, had not simply blessed Abram, he had conferred upon him a weighty significance, a connection that would ripple through the ages. In the year 1918 BCE, amidst the shifting sands of Canaan, a divine thread began to weave itself into the very fabric of history. The author of Hebrews, centuries later, would draw upon this thread, declaring in Hebrews 5:6 that Melchizedek was a priest forever, much like the Christ to come. This comparison was not mere rhetoric. It was an invitation to grasp the depth of Melchizedek's role in the divine narrative. The text emphasized a timeless priesthood, one unbound by lineage or ritual, a stark contrast to the Levitical priesthood that would emerge later. While the Levites derived their authority from their ancestry, Melchizedek's priesthood sprang from a source that transcended human heritage, echoing the eternal nature of Christ's own ministry. Melchizedek appeared at a pivotal moment, serving as a harbinger of a new covenant, a prelude to the grace that Jesus would ultimately extend. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, noted, "Melchizedek was a man of great wisdom and virtue, a king who offered sacrifices to God." This recognition of Melchizedek's character reflects the broader understanding that he was not merely a shadowy figure, but a significant player in the divine plan. His role as a priest was emblematic of a more profound truth, one that spoke to the heart of humanity's longing for reconciliation with the divine. The city of Salem, identified with Jerusalem, stood as a testament to the intersection of earthly and heavenly realms. The region, bustling with trade and cultural exchange, witnessed the beginnings of a faith that would soon take root and flourish. Archaeological excavations have revealed artifacts from this era, affirming that the city was not merely a backdrop, but a crucial site where the sacred met the mundane. The temple would later rise on this very ground, a physical manifestation of worship that would echo the eternal priesthood established by Melchizedek. As Abram reflected on this encounter, he understood that Melchizedek was not just a king and priest, but a type, an archetype that pointed towards something greater. The psalmist, centuries later, would echo this understanding in Psalm 110 before, proclaiming, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." This prophetic declaration foreshadowed the coming of a Messiah, whose priesthood would be eternal, bridging the divide between God and humanity. In the 1st century CE, as the Roman Empire cast its shadow over the land, the significance of Melchizedek's legacy would become even more pronounced. The early Christians, grappling with their identity and faith in a hostile environment, would look to Melchizedek as a symbol of hope. The Epistle to the Hebrews served as a reminder that Jesus, like Melchizedek, was not constrained by the traditions or expectations of the world. His priesthood was defined by a radical new covenant that offered grace and redemption to all. Historically, the Roman occupation brought about tumultuous changes. The Jewish people, longing for deliverance, found solace in the idea that their faith was rooted in an eternal promise, one that transcended the oppression they faced. Jesus' ministry resonated with Melchizedek's timeless priesthood, offering a new way of understanding their relationship with God. The sacrifices of the temple were no longer the end. They were a precursor to the ultimate sacrifice that Christ would make. In this light, Melchizedek's encounter with Abram became a powerful metaphor, illustrating the deep-seated need for a mediator between God and humanity. The idea of a priest who could stand in the gap, offering blessings and intercession, found its fullest expression in Jesus. The early church grappled with this deep mystery, and the words of Hebrews became a clarion call, urging them to cling to the hope found in this eternal priesthood. As the sun set over the hills of Canaan, Abram's heart swelled with the weight of revelation. He had not merely met a king, he had encountered a divine archetype. In that moment, the kingship and priesthood of Melchizedek were not mere relics of the past, but living truths that would reverberate through the ages. The promise of a priest forever, tethered to the very essence of God's plan for humanity, began to take root in the minds and hearts of those who would follow in Abram's footsteps. The significance of Melchizedek was not confined to his own time. Rather, it served as a bridge between the Old Covenant, steeped in law and tradition, and the New Covenant, anchored in grace and redemption. This understanding would later find expression in the words of the Apostle Paul, who articulated the implications of Christ's priesthood. For there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus. 1 Timothy 2:5. Each echo of Melchizedek's name would remind future generations of the possibility of divine communion. His legacy would challenge believers to see beyond the shadows of the past and embrace the fullness of what had been offered through Christ. As the priest of the Most High, Melchizedek had set a precedent, a divine invitation to enter into a relationship marked by grace, not ritual. In the years that followed, scholars and theologians would ponder the depths of Melchizedek's significance, yet the truth remained. He was a forerunner, a type of the Christ who would fulfill the ancient promises. The tapestry of faith that began with Abram and Melchizedek would continue to unfold, revealing the intricate design of God's plan for salvation. As the world turned, and empires rose and fell, the eternal priesthood remained a steadfast anchor, inviting all into the embrace of grace and mercy. In the ancient world of 1918 BCE, amid the dusty paths of Canaan, the figure of Melchizedek emerges not merely as a king, but as a transcendent priest, a role that would echo through history like the sound of a distant trumpet. The book of Hebrews, written centuries later, would illuminate this duality, asserting that Melchizedek's priesthood was unlike any other, standing as a superior order to the Levitical priesthood established under the law of Moses. As ink flowed onto parchment, the author of Hebrews drew a profound connection between Melchizedek and Christ, stating in Hebrews 7:3, "Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever." To fully appreciate this assertion, one must understand the cultural and historical context of the Levitical priesthood. Established around 1446 BCE, during the Exodus from Egypt, it was rooted in the lineage of Aaron, Moses' brother. The Levites were tasked with the sacred duties of the tabernacle and later the temple, their priestly role defined by rigorous rituals and sacrificial laws. Their ancestry, however, constrained them within a temporal framework, reliant on human lineage for their authority. In contrast, Melchizedek appears abruptly in the narrative, almost as if he were a divine enigma, unbound by the ancestral ties that defined his successors. When Abram encountered Melchizedek in the valley of Shaveh, he was not merely greeted by a king, but by a figure who bore the weight of divine authority. The king of Salem brought forth bread and wine, a simple yet profound offering, symbolic of communion and sustenance. This act of sharing was not just a meal, it was a covenant, an acknowledgement of divine favor and blessing. Melchizedek blessed Abram, proclaiming, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth," a declaration that would resonate through the ages, affirming Abram's role in God's unfolding plan. The significance of this blessing cannot be understated. In a world where the favor of the gods was sought through sacrifice and ritual, Melchizedek's blessing bestowed legitimacy on Abram's victories. When Abram responded by giving Melchizedek a tithe, 1/10 of his spoils, he recognized a higher spiritual authority. This act of giving, detailed in Genesis 14:20, established a precedent that would be echoed in the practices of future generations. It was an acknowledgement of the divine source of all blessings, and a foreshadowing of the greater sacrifice that would come through Christ. As the author of Hebrews elaborated on Melchizedek's priesthood, he emphasized its eternal nature. Unlike the Levitical priests, whose service was marked by mortality and impermanence, Melchizedek's priesthood was characterized by its ability to transcend time. The scriptures reflect this beautifully, suggesting that Melchizedek was made like the Son of God, a phrase that invites deep contemplation about the nature of priesthood itself. It implies a role not just as an intermediary between the divine and humanity, but as a reflection of a more profound truth, one that points to the ultimate high priest, Jesus Christ. Archaeological findings have further enriched our understanding of Melchizedek's time. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century, contain references to Melchizedek as a heavenly figure, hinting at the belief in his continued intercession and presence beyond the earthly realm. These texts suggest that the early Jewish community viewed Melchizedek not merely as a historical figure, but as an archetype of divine mediation, bridging the gap between the sacred and the profane. In contemplating Melchizedek's legacy, one cannot overlook the implications for those grappling with their faith in the early Christian era. As they faced persecution and uncertainty, the notion of an eternal priesthood provided comfort and assurance. The author of Hebrews encouraged believers to see in Melchizedek a model of hope and continuity, a reminder that despite the tumult of their lives, they were part of a divine narrative that transcended their immediate struggles. For the early Christians, the implications were revolutionary. Unlike the rituals of the temple, which required constant offerings and were tied to a specific lineage, the priesthood of Melchizedek, and by extension, Christ, offered a new way to connect with God. The sacrifice of Jesus, viewed through the lens of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood, became not just a singular event, but the fulfillment of a divine promise that had been woven through the fabric of history since the time of Abram. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the hills of Canaan, Abram pondered the weight of his encounter with Melchizedek. The blessing he received echoed within him, a reminder of the divine favor that had accompanied him through battles and journeys. He understood that this moment was not just a fleeting encounter, but a pivotal junction in a larger narrative, one that would shape the destiny of nations and the hearts of generations yet unborn. In the stillness of that twilight, he recognized the profound truth that Melchizedek represented. A priesthood that was not confined by lineage or ritual, but one that existed in the eternal now, forever interceding on behalf of those who sought the face of God. As he knelt in reverence, the weight of history settled around him, and he felt the stirring of a legacy that would transcend time, forever intertwining the destinies of kings and commoners, the sacred and the mundane. In the 1st century, as the Roman Empire tightened its grip around Judea, the writer of Hebrews contemplated the significance of Melchizedek in light of the new covenant brought forth by Jesus Christ. This epistle, believed to have been penned sometime around 64 to 70 CE, articulates a profound theological shift, asserting that Jesus is a high priest in the Order of Melchizedek. This declaration not only redefined priesthood, but also echoed through the centuries, resonating with both Jewish and Gentile audiences in ways that would challenge their understanding of divine authority. The writer invoked Psalm 110 before, where it is proclaimed, "You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek." This was no mere recitation of an ancient text. It was a radical assertion that the priesthood of Jesus transcended the Levitical lineage established around 1446 BCE, when Moses received the law at Mount Sinai. Those who followed the Levitical priesthood were bound to serve in the temple, offering sacrifices that were temporary and ultimately insufficient for the atonement of sin. In contrast, Melchizedek's priesthood was characterized by an eternal covenant, one that Jesus fulfilled through his life, death, and resurrection. As the writer elaborated the significance of Melchizedek's dual role as both king and priest in Salem, later known as Jerusalem, became increasingly evident. Melchizedek's very name means King of Righteousness, and his title, King of Salem, means King of Peace. This duality reflected the essence of Christ's mission, which sought to reconcile humanity to God and offer peace in a world rife with turmoil. The juxtaposition of earthly and eternal authority resulted in a new understanding of God's promise, a promise that would not wane with time or tradition. In a poignant reflection on Melchizedek's encounter with Abram, the writer recounted how Abram, returning victorious from battle, offered him a tithe of the spoils, a symbolic act that underscored the recognition of divine authority. This moment, described in Genesis 14:18-20, established a precedent for the acknowledgement of God's sovereignty over one's life and possessions. It also served to foreshadow the ultimate sacrifice of Christ, who would give everything for the sake of humanity. The writer of Hebrews emphasized that the priesthood of Jesus is superior because it is not based on genealogy or earthly lineage, but on the power of an indestructible life. Hebrews 7:16. In this context, the resurrection of Jesus becomes a cornerstone of faith, signifying that death has been defeated and a new way has been opened. Unlike the Levitical priests, who were numerous and required succession due to mortality, Jesus remains eternally alive, interceding for believers before the throne of grace. As the early Christians reflected on this profound truth, the implications were vast and far-reaching. The Old Covenant, with its sacrificial system and rituals, began to fade in comparison to the living reality of Christ's priesthood. The writer noted in Hebrews 7:17, "For it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." This assertion not only elevated Jesus' status, but also invited believers to enter a new relationship with God, one that was intimate and direct, free from the barriers previously established by the law. The changes rippled through the community of believers, who began to see themselves not merely as followers of a new sect, but as partakers in a new covenant that offered hope and redemption. The weight of sacrifice shifted from the hands of the priests to the heart of the faithful, who were now called to live in the light of this eternal promise. As they gathered in homes, sharing communion, a meal that echoed the communion between Melchizedek and Abram, they experienced a foretaste of the kingdom that was to come. The writer's words also resonated with the echoes of history. Archaeological findings, such as those unearthed at Qumran, hint at the complex interplay of religious thought during this period. The community there revered Melchizedek as a messianic figure, suggesting that the concept of an eternal priesthood was not entirely foreign. This historical richness added layers to the understanding of Melchizedek, elevating him from a mere biblical character to a pivotal figure in the unfolding narrative of salvation. As the first century advanced, the implications of Melchizedek's legacy continued to inspire theological exploration. The early church grappled with these ideas, seeking to articulate their faith in a world that was often hostile to their beliefs. The notion that Jesus was a high priest in the Order of Melchizedek provided a robust framework for understanding his role in salvation history. It also served as a unifying thread, binding together Jewish and Gentile believers in a shared understanding of God's redemptive plan. In the quiet evenings of their gatherings, as the flickering lamps cast soft shadows against the walls, discussions flourished around the significance of Melchizedek's priesthood. They marveled at the divine orchestration that had led to this moment in history, where a humble carpenter from Nazareth had fulfilled the ancient prophecies and established a new covenant through his blood. The echoes of Melchizedek's blessing lingered in their hearts, a reminder of the connection between heaven and earth, between the eternal and the temporal. Thus, the Order of Melchizedek became a cornerstone in the faith of the early Christians, a profound truth that anchored their hope in Christ. As they reflected on the mystery of this ancient priest, they found not just a figure from the past, but a living testament to the enduring power of God's promises. Amidst the arid hills of Judea, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 cast a long shadow over centuries of interpretation regarding Melchizedek. These ancient texts, hidden within the crevices of Qumran's cliffs, unveiled a world steeped in spiritual fervor, a world that recognized the enigmatic figure of Melchizedek not merely as a king or priest, but as a celestial being, a priest of the Most High God. Scholars deciphering the scrolls found references that suggested Melchizedek had a role far beyond that of an earthly monarch. He was revered as a divine agent, a mediator between heaven and earth. The most intriguing of these texts is the so-called Melchizedek document, known as 11Q13. In it, Melchizedek is depicted as a figure who would enact judgment, a cosmic priest destined to bring about the end of days. This portrayal echoes the themes of Psalm 110:4, where the psalmist declares, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." The scrolls illuminate the belief that Melchizedek held an eternal priesthood that would transcend the temporal, a doctrine that resonated deeply within early Christian thought, where Jesus is seen as the fulfillment of this divine archetype. In the same breath, the archaeological excavations in Jerusalem have provided tangible evidence of the city's significance during the time of Melchizedek. Between 1961 and 1967, archaeologists unearthed remnants of the ancient city, revealing structures that suggest a thriving economy and religious life. The temple area, later to become central in Jewish worship, was already a focal point during Melchizedek's era. The significance of Salem, believed to be the precursor to Jerusalem, becomes clearer when considering its position at the crossroads of ancient trade routes. Merchants, travelers, and pilgrims alike would gather, their goods and prayers intertwining in the dusty streets. In 1918 BCE, when Abram encountered Melchizedek, the city was not merely a geographic location, it was a spiritual nexus. Texts from the period, including references to the trade of grain, textiles, and livestock, paint a picture of a vibrant society engaged in complex interactions. The existence of a king-priest like Melchizedek, who could bless and receive tithes, suggests a sophisticated understanding of both governance and spirituality. He offered not just bread and wine, symbols of sustenance and communion, but a deeper recognition of divine providence. As we delve deeper into the archaeological finds, the seals and inscriptions unearthed in the vicinity of Jerusalem provide further context to Melchizedek's legacy. These artifacts date back to the First Temple period and include names and titles associated with priests and kings, echoing the very roles attributed to Melchizedek. One inscription, found near the western wall of the temple, reads, "To the priest of the Most High," suggesting that such titles were in common currency, affirming the respect held for priestly figures within the community. The Qumran community, believed to have been a sect of Judaism awaiting a messianic figure, also revered Melchizedek in ways that reflect their theological aspirations. They viewed him as a precursor to their own understanding of the Messiah. The scrolls prophesied a time when Melchizedek would lead the faithful in a final battle against evil, a concept that would later find resonance in Christian eschatology. This melding of ancient belief with the emerging faith of Christianity underscores the transformative power of Melchizedek's figure throughout history. In 70 CE, when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, the significance of Melchizedek began to shift within the early Christian community. The letter to the Hebrews, composed shortly after this destruction, explicitly links Jesus Christ to Melchizedek, stating, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." Hebrews 5:6. This assertion not only solidified the spiritual lineage connecting Jesus to Melchizedek, but also provided early Christians a framework for understanding their faith in a post-temple world. The scrolls and archaeological evidence together weave a rich tapestry that illustrates how Melchizedek's legacy endured. He became a symbol of hope, of divine order amidst chaos, particularly in the tumultuous times of the Second Temple period. The remnant texts serve not only as reflections of faith, but as anchors, reminding believers of the eternal nature of their spiritual lineage. As listeners unwind into the depths of night, consider the weight of these discoveries. Melchizedek stands as a bridge between eras and faiths, his influence felt across millennia. The interplay of scripture and archaeology, once disparate, now converges to form a profound narrative that speaks of divine mystery and human longing. In the quiet corners of history, Melchizedek continues to inspire, echoing the timeless quest for understanding and connection with the divine. The legacy of Melchizedek reverberates through the tapestry of faith, woven intricately into the beliefs of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Each tradition views this enigmatic figure not merely as a historical character, but as a symbol rich with spiritual significance. In Jewish tradition, Melchizedek is revered as a priest-king of Salem, representing a unique fusion of sacred and secular authority. The Talmud explores his identity, referring to him as Shem, the son of Noah, suggesting a lineage that connects him to the covenantal promise bestowed upon humanity. This interpretation emphasizes Melchizedek's role as a precursor to the Levitical priesthood, established later during the Exodus around 1446 BCE. The Midrash elaborates on his priestly functions, noting that he served as a mediator between God and mankind long before the formal priesthood was instituted. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, in his writings, highlights how Melchizedek's blessing of Abram signifies a divine approval, stating, "He is a man of God and a priest of the Most High, a figure of righteousness in a world filled with chaos." In the Christian canon, the figure of Melchizedek takes on a transformative role as a type of Christ, particularly in the book of Hebrews, written between 64 to 70 CE. The author draws parallels between Melchizedek and Jesus, declaring in Hebrews 7:3 that Melchizedek is without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. This portrayal emphasizes the eternal nature of Christ's priesthood, contrasting it with the temporal Levitical order. The early church fathers, such as Augustine and Origen, viewed Melchizedek's offering of bread and wine to Abram as a foreshadowing of the Eucharist. This connection deepened the understanding of communion as a sacred act, linking the Old Covenant with the New. As the Church expanded, this interpretation allowed believers to see in Melchizedek a bridge between the ancient and the divine, embodying a priesthood that transcends time. Meanwhile, in Islamic tradition, Melchizedek is identified with the figure of Al-Hida, a wise and mystical figure believed to possess profound knowledge. The Quran does not mention Melchizedek directly. However, scholars like Al-Tabari note that he is often associated with righteousness and justice, qualities that resonate deeply within Islamic teachings. Muslims regard him as a symbol of monotheism and divine guidance, reflecting the ideals of the prophets who came before Muhammad. The Sufi tradition embraces Al-Qida as a guide, someone who embodies the wisdom of God and acts in accordance with divine will. This interpretation underscores the Islamic belief in the continuity of prophetic messages throughout history. The archaeological discoveries at Qumran have further illuminated Melchizedek's significance. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Melchizedek Scroll presents a vision of Melchizedek as a heavenly figure, intertwining his legacy with eschatological themes. This text, dated to the late Second Temple period, reveals a community that viewed Melchizedek as a messianic figure who would bring justice and redemption. The scroll reflects the diversity of thought surrounding Melchizedek, showcasing how different sects within Judaism grappled with his identity and role in the divine plan. In the realm of secular scholarship, debates persist regarding Melchizedek's historical existence. Some scholars argue for a historical figure who ruled over Jerusalem, while others suggest he may be a literary construct. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century CE, describes Melchizedek as a priest and king, emphasizing his significance in the history of Jerusalem. Yet, the lack of concrete archaeological evidence from his time leaves room for speculation. The cultural interpretations of Melchizedek, from the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic perspectives, highlight the challenges of pinning down a singular identity for him. The impact of Melchizedek's story extends beyond theological discourse into the lives of believers today. In Jewish prayers, the mention of Melchizedek serves as a reminder of the eternal covenant between God and his people. Christians find in him a profound connection to Christ's sacrifice, enriching their understanding of the Eucharist. For Muslims, the figure represents wisdom and divine guidance, echoing the teachings of the prophets. Each tradition, while distinct, draws upon the same wellspring of ancient texts to articulate their beliefs, weaving Melchizedek into their spiritual fabric. As the sun sets over the hills of Jerusalem, the legacy of Melchizedek continues to shimmer in the hearts of those who seek understanding. From the time of Abram to the present day, his influence remains, a testament to the enduring quest for connection with the divine. A figure of mystery and reverence, Melchizedek stands as a bridge across cultures and time, reflecting the shared search for meaning in the sacred narrative of humanity. In the heart of the ancient Near East, around 1918 BCE, a new chapter emerged from the dust of battle. The aftermath of conflict lingered in the air as Abram, weary yet resolute, returned victorious from the valley of Shaveh. He had triumphed over the kings of the East, liberating his nephew Lot from the clutches of captivity. It was a display of courage, a testament to divine favor, and it was here that Melchizedek, the enigmatic king of Salem, stepped into the narrative, embodying a profound symbol of peace and righteousness. Melchizedek approached Abram not with the clangor of weapons or the bitterness of war, but with the gifts of bread and wine. Genesis 14:18 records this moment with a simplicity that belies its depth. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. This offering was more than mere sustenance. It was a sacred act, a gesture of communion that transcended the chaos of human conflict. The bread, warm and fresh, carried the aroma of the earth, while the wine, rich and deep in color, sparkled with the promise of joy and restoration. As Abram received these gifts, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over him. Here stood a man who represented not just a city, but an ideal, a ruler who governed with righteousness. Salem, often identified with Jerusalem, was a place where divine and human intersected, a sanctuary amid the tumult of life. In Melchizedek, Abram recognized a king whose authority was derived not from military might, but from a deep connection to the divine. This was the essence of Melchizedek's priesthood, as articulated in Psalms 110:4, which declares, "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." Reflecting on this encounter, Abram understood the significance of Melchizedek's role. He was a precursor to the coming Messiah, a figure who would embody the peace that eluded the world. This priest-king's name itself, Melchizedek, means King of Righteousness, a title that resonates through the ages. It foreshadowed the mission of Christ, who would later be heralded as the Prince of Peace. The very act of offering a tithe, a tenth of the spoils of war, was an acknowledgement of God's sovereignty, a recognition that all victory is ultimately divine. The historical context of Salem adds depth to Melchizedek's character. Archaeological findings in Jerusalem highlight the city's significance during this era, a time when it was a nexus of trade, culture, and spirituality. The city would later become a focal point for worship and sacrifice, central to the Israelite faith. The significance of Melchizedek's kingship extends beyond his immediate interaction with Abram. It reverberates through the annals of history, influencing generations to come. As Abram knelt to offer his tithe, the act itself was laden with meaning. Tithing, an ancient practice, was recognized in various cultures as a way to honor deities and acknowledge their blessings. By giving a tenth of his spoils to Melchizedek, Abram established a spiritual precedent that would endure through the ages. This ritual not only demonstrated gratitude, but also foreshadowed the greater sacrifice that would be demanded of humanity. The interplay of righteousness and peace in Melchizedek's character is further illuminated by the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in Qumran in 1947. Among these ancient texts are references that depict Melchizedek not merely as a historical figure, but as a heavenly archetype. The Melchizedek scroll speaks of a messianic figure, suggesting that he embodies the hope of redemption. His priesthood is portrayed as eternal, transcending the limitations of time and space, much like the promise of Christ. In the shadow of the ancient oak trees surrounding Salem, Abram and Melchizedek shared a moment that would forever alter the course of spiritual history. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers, and the sounds of the nearby brook provided a soothing backdrop. It was here that they engaged in a solemn conversation, the weight of their words echoing through the ages. Melchizedek's blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, resonated deeply within Abram's soul, affirming his divine calling. As the conversation deepened, Melchizedek spoke of the promise that awaited Abram, a legacy that would extend beyond his lifetime. The land of Canaan, rich and fertile, was not just a geographical territory. It was a divine inheritance, a sacred space where the covenant between God and Abram would unfold. This promise echoed through history, leading to the establishment of Israel and the eventual coming of Christ. The duality of Melchizedek's role as both king and priest serves as a bridge between the Old and New Testaments. The book of Hebrews, written around 64 to 70 CE, draws upon this archetype to illustrate the profound connection between Melchizedek and Jesus Christ. Hebrews 7:3 states, "He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever." This lineage, steeped in mystery, speaks to the eternal nature of God's covenant with humanity. As dusk fell upon Salem, the stars began to twinkle in the vast expanse of the sky, a reminder of the promise made to Abram, "Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them." Genesis 15:5. With Melchizedek by his side, Abram felt the weight of this promise take root within him. It was a moment of divine communion, a glimpse into the unfolding story of redemption that would span millennia. The legacy of Melchizedek, the King of peace and righteousness, continues to resonate in the hearts of believers today. His encounter with Abram is not merely a historical event. It is a reminder of the divine order that underpins the cosmos. As the night deepened and the world around them settled into silence, the significance of Melchizedek's presence lingered, a beacon of hope and peace amid the turmoil of life. He stood as a symbol of what was to come, a peace that surpasses understanding, rooted in the righteousness of God. The legacy of Melchizedek, King of Salem and priest of God Most High, unfurls like an intricate tapestry through the annals of sacred history, woven into the very fabric of faith across generations. His encounter with Abram, a cornerstone in the narrative of divine providence, echoes profoundly in the writings of the psalmist and the author of Hebrews. This interaction, which took place in the year 1918 BCE, not only established Melchizedek as a pivotal figure, but also laid the groundwork for understanding the duality of kingship and priesthood. Melchizedek's offering of bread and wine to Abram may seem a simple act, yet it resonates through centuries. This meal, imbued with spiritual significance, foreshadows future rituals, including the Last Supper, where Jesus would share bread and wine with his disciples, establishing a new covenant. The Gospel of Matthew records this moment, where Jesus, breaking the bread, proclaims, "Take, eat, this is my body." Such parallels underscore the continuity of divine revelation, linking Melchizedek's ancient act to the heart of Christian communion. In the centuries following the encounter, Jewish tradition held Melchizedek in high regard. The Talmud, compiled around 500 CE, recognizes him not merely as a historical figure, but as a symbol of righteousness and justice. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, in his Reflections on Melchizedek, suggests that his priesthood represents a divine affirmation of faith that transcends lineage, contrasting sharply with the Levitical priesthood established around 1446 BCE. This lineage, though significant, is rooted in human imperfection, whereas Melchizedek's status as a priest forever, Psalm 110:4, signals an everlasting divine covenant. The Christian interpretation of Melchizedek reaches its zenith in the New Testament. The author of Hebrews, writing between 64 and 70 CE, draws a stark contrast between the Levitical priesthood and the Order of Melchizedek. He states, "For it is evident that our Lord arose from Judah, of which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning priesthood." Hebrews 7:14. This assertion elevates Melchizedek as a precursor to Christ, establishing a priestly order that is eternal, not bound by the limitations of human governance. The significance of this is profound. It suggests that faith, rather than lineage, is the key to communion with the divine. Archaeological discoveries, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran in 1947, illuminate the reverence for Melchizedek in early Judaism. Among these texts, the Melchizedek scroll alludes to his role as a messianic figure, further embedding him within the eschatological hopes of the Jewish people. The Qumran community viewed him as a heavenly priest who would play a crucial role in the final redemption of Israel. This idea of Melchizedek as a divine figure not only reflects the community's faith, but also intertwines with the broader narrative of messiahship that would later find fulfillment in Jesus. In the early church, the writings of church fathers like Augustine and Origen expanded the understanding of Melchizedek's significance. Augustine, in his work City of God, articulates that Melchizedek's priesthood is a prefiguration of Christ's, establishing a theological foundation that continues to inform Christian thought. Origen, writing in the 3rd century, emphasizes the eternal nature of Melchizedek's priesthood, positing that it points to the divine nature of Christ. This theological lineage demonstrates how Melchizedek's impact transcended his own time, influencing core doctrines of faith. As centuries unfolded, Melchizedek's legacy continued to inspire theological discourse. In the Islamic tradition, he is identified with Al-Hida, a figure associated with wisdom and guidance. Al-Tabari, a prominent Islamic historian of the 9th century, recounts narratives that highlight Melchizedek's role not only as a priest, but also as a teacher of righteousness. This shared reverence among the Abrahamic faiths captures the essence of Melchizedek as a symbol of divine favor and moral integrity, transcending cultural boundaries. The archaeological landscape of Jerusalem, particularly through excavations conducted between 1961 and 1967, provides additional context for understanding Melchizedek's significance. As the city flourished under Roman occupation, the temple became a focal point for worship and sacrifice, reinforcing the enduring importance of priestly roles. The contrast between the Levitical priesthood and Melchizedek's timeless priesthood offered a theological reflection on the nature of divine authority, a theme that resonates deeply in the religious consciousness of both Jews and Christians. As the faithful reflect on Melchizedek's encounter with Abram, they encounter a narrative rich with implications for their spiritual journeys. His legacy prompts questions of identity, ancestry, and the nature of divine service. The act of tithing, as Abram presented a tenth of his spoils to Melchizedek, becomes a symbol of gratitude and recognition of divine providence. This practice, rooted in that ancient encounter, carries forward into contemporary worship as a tangible expression of faith. Ultimately, Melchizedek stands as a beacon of righteousness, a figure whose influence ripples through time. His dual role as king and priest invites believers to consider the integration of spiritual authority and governance, a theme relevant throughout history. The interplay of faith and leadership continues to challenge and inspire those who seek to embody the principles of justice and mercy in their lives. In the hushed moments of reflection, the legacy of Melchizedek invites a deeper understanding of the divine narrative that binds humanity across epochs. His story, rich with divine favor, echoes in the hearts of those who seek connection with the sacred, offering a timeless reminder of the power of faith in shaping destinies. In the stillness of the evening, as shadows lengthened over the ancient hills of Canaan, the the significance of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood resonated deeply. The echoes of his encounter with Abram lingered like the fading light of the sun, illuminating a profound truth found in Hebrews 7:24-25. But he, because he continues forever, has an unchangeable priesthood. Therefore, he is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him. This sense of permanence stood in stark contrast to the transient nature of human life. The city of Salem, later known as Jerusalem, bore witness to generations seeking divine favor. In this sacred space, Melchizedek embodied a unique blend of kingship and priesthood, a dual role that was rare in the ancient Near East. This was no ordinary priest. He was a forerunner of a greater promise, a divine archetype that would echo through the ages. His offering of bread and wine to Abram was not merely a meal, but a foreshadowing of the Last Supper, where Christ would share bread and wine with his disciples, sealing a new covenant through his sacrifice. Historical records and archaeological findings from Qumran reveal that Melchizedek was revered not only as a priest-king, but also as a celestial being, intertwined with the hopes of the community. The Melchizedek scroll, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, speaks of a messianic figure who would bring salvation and deliverance. This scroll, dating to the 1st century BCE, highlights the expectation of a priestly Messiah who would restore Israel and fulfill the divine promises made to the patriarchs. Reflecting on the significance of Melchizedek's role, one cannot overlook the implications of his eternal priesthood for the early Christians. The author of Hebrews drew a direct connection to Jesus, emphasizing that unlike the Levitical priests, who were mortal and had to offer sacrifices repeatedly, Christ's sacrifice was once for all. The profound statement in Hebrews 7:26-27 illustrates this. For such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens, who does not need daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins, and then for the people's. In the context of the Roman occupation of Judea, the early church faced persecution and uncertainty. Yet, the teachings surrounding Melchizedek provided a source of hope and identity. The notion that they were part of a lineage extending back to the promises made to Abram fortified their faith amidst trials. Melchizedek's priesthood symbolized a bridge between the Old Covenant and the New, a divine assurance that God's plan was unfailing. The reverence for Melchizedek continued to inspire theological discourse among Jewish and Christian scholars alike. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, in his writings, noted the importance of Melchizedek as an exemplar of righteousness. He articulated that Melchizedek represents the universal call to holiness, transcending cultural and racial boundaries. This concept resonates deeply in a world often divided by strife, reminding us of the shared human quest for meaning and connection to the divine. As the night deepened, one could almost hear the whispers of the ancients speaking through the ages. Their stories of faith, trials, and divine encounters were not merely historical accounts, but living narratives that shaped the present. The legacy of Melchizedek stands as a testament to the enduring nature of God's promises and the hope that continues to shine through the darkness, illuminating the path toward redemption. In this quiet moment of reflection, we are invited to ponder the eternal interplay of heaven and earth, where the priestly lineage of Melchizedek converges with the life and ministry of Christ. This divine tapestry enriches our understanding of faith, urging us to embrace the fullness of what it means to walk in communion with the divine. The profound implications of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood extend beyond ancient texts, speaking directly to our hearts today, calling us to a deeper understanding of our place within this sacred narrative. That brings us to the end of Melchizedek. In this episode, we followed Abram as he achieved a remarkable victory with just 318 men and encountered Melchizedek in Salem. Their meeting in the Valley of Sheva highlighted Melchizedek's significance, leaving Abram in reflective awe over the communion they shared. The story sets a foundation for understanding Melchizedek's role and legacy in the biblical narrative. Before we close, a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the real people and real moments you preserved so faithfully across thousands of years. Stories of faith, of failure, and of your grace that never gives up on us. Wherever this listener is right now, at the start of their day, during a quiet moment, or at the close of the night, may what they heard today take root deep in their heart. May it encourage them, challenge them, and remind them that the same God who moved in these ancient stories is still moving today. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. New stories released every week on the Shepherd's Lantern. God bless you. We'll see you in the next one.